I'm your host, Madeline.
I'm your co-host, David.
And today we are doing part 2
Yeah.
of
Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia.
You know, you've changed your tune a little bit.
Have I?
You were Tito-pilled.
I was Tito-pilled, but that was before the IMF loans happened.
Yeah, I mean, like, this was in the Parenti, like, this should have not come as news to you.
It was not news to me. However, when you're talking about the revolution, it's hard not to root for the guy who fought off all the Nazis.
No, I mean,
You get
obviously.
into it. You get into it. You're like, damn, this
That
guy's
guy-
fighting
and-
off the Nazis. And look, he made a whole revolution.
I will say, I think, right, like, I perused the book you sent me, the with Stalin book.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, right?
And I read the other side of that, like the Gilasky book,
Mm-hmm.
that was like the Conversations with Stalin thing,
Right?
or whatever. And I feel like I can see both sides.
I can see both sides too.
Right, like where it's like, we have been trying to do a state.
Yes.
It is necessary that state have a certain integrity if it is supposed to operate on the world stage.
Yes.
Maybe don't get involved in our shit so much.
Yes, I see that. And I also
Right.
see it would be cool if we didn't get nuked by the United States, though.
No, I understand both sides, right?
I understand both sides as well.
I feel like this is an instance where it's like, okay, so do you want to explain what?
Okay, so audience, we were talking about the Tito-Stalin split, but that is a huge part of the episode, which I don't even know if we'll get to it today.
Oh boy,
I think we'll get to
swear
it.
You were like, this is because
We start with it, actually. I just looked at my notes. We start with
it was like
I didn't remember where we ended last
week. You were like, we did a short episode last time, and you're like, this is only going to be a 2-part thing. God, so cool.
Well, no, I don't think that's going to happen. So when we left off last week's episode, World War II had just ended.
Yes.
Okay, so
the Americans won World War II. We defeated Nazism.
I don't quite remember it happening that way.
Stalingrad was like a footnote.
Oh, yeah. The USSR was cucked by our great capitalist power and was like, save us, the United States, save us.
All of our grandfathers were in jazz bands.
And definitely not Nazis adjacent or racist.
I was saying, my grandpa was cool as shit.
My grandpa was Korean War era, not World War II era.
Oh yeah.
So I can't speak to my great grandfather. I don't know
you have some generation blood on your hands.
I'm sure we must.
Yeah.
Okay. So no, none of that's real. So what actually happened, obviously, is while the communists in Yugoslavia defeated the Nazis and kicked them out.
The Ustashi.
And the Ustashi.
Yeah.
The Nazis and the Ustashi.
Which were like the Nazis who made the Nazis a little freaked out.
Yeah. When the Nazis got to Yugoslavia, some of the people there took to it so well that it even some of the Nazis were like, "Whoa, that's a little much."
Yeah, can you imagine
that was in Croatia? Those ones,
like having to have Joseph Goebbels tell you to calm down.
Yeah, no, you're really doing a lot. Yeah. So then the communists were like, "Fuck all these fascists, external and internal. We're getting rid of them." The regular government fled, and the communists built together a mass kind of movement to fight the Nazis. It wasn't just communists; it was communist-led, but it was just everyday average people who wanted to defend their country from communists. Or from Nazis, rather, and joined the communists. So they won. And then shortly after that, obviously, the USSR defeated the Nazis on the global stage.
Yes.
So World War II ends, and that's where today's episode starts.
Hey, Madeline, you're forgetting something.
What?
Molotov-Ribbentrop.
I'm not forgetting Molotov-Ribbentrop. Oh, my God. I got to talk about Molotov-Ribbentrop.
I'm just saying.
What do you say? We actually talk about it in here a little bit.
You talk about
talk a little bit.
Just
a little, not a lot. Just
this
a
is
touch.
More peripatetic than I am accustomed to from you.
Really?
Yes, you usually go. I will occasionally look over at your notes when you've done the research, and listeners, I hope it is never audible. A sigh of defeat crosses my lips.
Why?
Because I see by year where you have gone, where I'm like, okay, so Madeline is doing 2000, 2001, 2002.
Yes, this is how it helps me to tell the story in chronological order as things happen.
But this is, if we're doing Molotov-Ribbentrop, we're
we do a
We're
little
skipping time.
we do a little flashback. You're
Okay,
right.
so
Okay, so let's
where are we
start.
starting?
So we're starting World War II ends, and there's this period from 1946 to 1948 where the new government in Yugoslavia starts to take shape. Now, remember, the government branches, as Stalin had talked about, started to get founded based on the apparati that they found that they needed in fighting the Nazis in order to make that fight go. And remember, in Yugoslavia, they had a unique revolution because the revolution was both simultaneously a fight for their freedom from the Nazis, but also a fight for socialism. And this is going to be a big deal in the Tito-Soviet split. So 1946 to 1948, all these little mechanisms they had developed during the war to kind of help them administer the things they needed to fight the Nazis start to get cemented more as an actual government. The war is over, and this new government finally comes into proper fruition post-war with two new additional things, which is the Constitution and something called just the general law. So on January 31st, 1946, the Constitution of Yugoslavia is proclaimed, this new Yugoslavia. Remember, the old Yugoslavia only lasted 25 years or something like that. And in May of 1946, the general law on people's councils was passed.
Okay, so what's the general law on people's councils?
Okay, well, the people's councils, remember, they had kind of come from these organizations that had helped them during the war. And we're going to get into exactly what the people's councils had laws for. But basically, both of these things together, it's important to know first, outlined the function of the new government. They talked about how elections worked, what autonomy different areas had, talked about democratic centralism, the right to recall people who had been elected, and just unified authority. And the basic tasks of the people's councils was to plan agriculture, communal life, industry, trade, artisans, finance, labor relations, culture, education, you name it. So the councils were structured around smaller village life, and the law of the people's councils allowed for special committees and commissions to be established just for administrative duties in these fields. So these councils would have their own administrative sections based on this law, granting them the right to do this for economic matters, finance, education, social welfare, health, general business, and planning commissions. And economic matters sounds a little confusing next to finance, but economic matters would be more think industry, like agriculture, trade, labor relations, forestry, things like that. Now, the executive councils were also set up, and they were the higher elected organs of every people's council. And throughout 1947, there were these new elections that got held to actually fill these seats of these people's councils, and nearly 120,000 people were elected to local councils, with over 5,000 elected to city councils, which were one step higher. So Yugoslavia's cooking. They're going along. They're building socialism. But in June of 1948, the Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries would end up breaking off all economic and diplomatic ties with Yugoslavia.
All right. And this is over where Serbia is going to sit in this?
No. We'll get... hold on, let me explain. So,
okay.
Yugoslavia ends up getting pretty isolated after this, and it kind of has a hard time surviving, cut off from the rest of the world. So people call this, the Tito-Stalin split. And it's pretty interesting to get into everything that led up to this. So we're just going to backtrack a little bit for how we ended up here. So during World War II, when Yugoslavia was invaded by the by the Nazis, they were still operating, the USSR was still operating under the non-aggression pact that they had made with Nazi Germany, which meant they were contractually obligated not to intervene unless they, too, wanted to immediately go to war with Germany. And this is what you were talking about called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, David.
Which we talked about in the Cambridge 5 episode.
Is that, we've talked about it in a few episodes. It's a little relevant.
Which was, I think we talked about it because John Cairncross had essentially been as a double agent, sending messages to the Soviet Union being there's no way in hell that the, what ends up being the Allied powers are going to intervene on your behalf.
Right.
You have to you got
to do this on your own.
You just survived a civil war.
Yes.
And the commensurate economic devastation that goes along with it.
Yeah, they were in a rough place.
You can't fight the Nazis.
Exactly. So basically what had happened is that the USSR had early on identified Nazi Germany as a major threat. But for reasons David just explained, they knew they were not in a strong enough place to take on the Nazis. They had just gone through a revolution. They were only a few years off of massive civil wars. They were economically pretty devastated. So they actually reached out to Britain and France in writing, and we have heard that they also talked verbally with the United States. Now, Britain and France will focus on because we have proof of this. Britain and France, they were like, hey, we should form an alliance together so we could all take on the Nazis together because this is going to be a problem. And Britain and France were like, no, like, fuck you, basically. We're
And
not
this was
doing
one
that.
thing that came out of, I think one of the Karen Cross books was that Churchill specifically was pretty comfortably, I mean, they were all so anti-communist that they were like, we're actually kind of fine with the Nazis fucking up
Yes,
the Soviet, like that's actually in our best interest.
exactly. So they said no, and the USSR realized they were kind of on their own. So they went to Nazi Germany and they were like, can we do a non-aggression pact, temporary non-aggression pact where we agree we're not going to fuck with each other? Now, in the USSR's mind, this would buy them time to build up weaponry and rebuild their military. And, I'm sure Nazi Germany was like, yeah, we don't want to deal with you right now. You're really, really big. We're just going to take over all these smaller places in the meantime. So they signed this non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, which is not an alliance. Some people like to say it was an alliance. It was not an alliance. And then they allocated the USSR an additional 30% of their funding towards military buildup in anticipation of the war with Nazi Germany they knew would be coming. But this meant that they were trying to be strategic about when they entered this war with Germany. They wanted to make sure if they entered, they would win. So when Yugoslavia gets invaded at a time when the USSR knows they're not militaristically strong enough to defeat Nazi Germany, they're like, we have to cut off all ties with Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
So Tito appears to have understood this. And considering the USSR defeated Nazi Germany, it also appears to have been strategically a good call on their part. And it seems like everybody was pretty fine with this. So in June of 1941, Tito still informed the Comintern and Stalin about his plans for an uprising. And Stalin was like, look, okay, we know that you are fighting off Nazis there, but think long-term and strategic too. If you want to win the war and not just win the battle, you need a strong alliance with Western capitalist powers. And that's going to be hard to get. And, if you try to make sure this is a communist uprising, nobody is ever going to ally with you or back you in this, and you're not strong enough. And this had a lot to do with the USSR realizing this about themselves too. So Stalin was like, what if you did this in 2 stages? Strategically, stage 1, expel the Nazis and let Yugoslavia have the previous government back that's not communist. And then 2, when you're ready, stage a communist rebellion against the old government. You do this in 2 stages, and that will ensure that you win. So Tito actually took this seriously, and Tito was like, okay. So he went and he met with the old government, their army's leader, who was a guy named Colonel Draza Mihailovic, to see about Stalin's strategy, and was like, hey, I'll give you the position of chief of staff amongst our partisan forces, our anti-Nazi forces here, if you want to go in together. But Mihailovic was also intensely anti-communist, like the French and the British, and was like, well, no, you would be more likely to be our true enemy than the Nazis.
Yeah.
So similar to what you just said. So later on, Mihailovic would indeed, yes, collaborate with the Nazis because he was like, communists are a worst threat to us. So Tito was like, okay, USSR, I can't do it. Nobody will do it with me. So I'm just going to denounce the government in exile altogether and go forward with this one plan, which honestly seems like the only move he really had. But Stalin was a little annoyed by this. He was like, I don't know, maybe he thought this was a bit of interest or something. I'm not sure. But who are we to judge? So today, socialist Yugoslavia and the USSR both don't exist, right? So it seems hard to say who really had the better long-term strategy plan. There's no way to know. They're both not here.
I'm going to say, from my perspective,
yeah,
neither of them had a good long-term plan.
Because they're not here anymore.
Because they are not.
Exactly. So this is kind of a tomato-tomato situation to me. Stalin and Tito arguing about the right way to handle this. Neither of them are here, so we don't know. So Stalin was like, hey, communists of the world, you are going to have to work with the bourgeois states in order to defeat the Nazis once and for all. And you need to be aware of that. And Yugoslavia was like, that's crazy. Like, no, that's shocking and we don't want to do this. But at the same time, everybody kind of knew it's not like Yugoslavia on their own had the numbers to pull off the whole shebang, defeating the Nazis once and for all. They could only kind of deal with their own regional skirmishes. So after the war, these issues didn't really seem to be such a big deal because it looked like Yugoslavia and the USSR were really intent on working together. But it became clear that Yugoslavia was not exactly open to being controlled by the USSR. And the USSR was not exactly trusting that Yugoslavia would be able to be communist in a way that didn't upset the West.
No, this is something, right? This is the thing that Gila's writes about when I mentioned the thing about Serbia, which is there was like a definite, like, in Gilas's account, and remember this guy went massively anti-communist eventually, but this is when pre that in his conversations with Stalin, that there was a certain amount of like the various states that, or the various nationalities that make up Yugoslavia, how are they going to be integrated with the Soviet Union or with like global communism? And that seems to have been the rub for Gilas. I think that's how you say his name.
Okay.
DG. Do you remember this guy?
Yeah, I think so.
J guy.
Yeah, but also I feel like that's something the USSR would have handled very well, actually. And I don't necessarily think that either Yugoslavia or the USSR, it doesn't seem like we're super committed to the idea of absorbing Yugoslavia into the
No, I
USSR.
mean, I think, right, like, it was just like, how are we going to be integrated with one another? And they came to a bad end.
Yes.
They did not agree.
They did not figure it out. So, you know, this is kind of like a source of conflict. And they kind of felt like the USSR might be regarding them more like a satellite country. And they're like, no, we want to be in charge of our own destiny. So the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, though, did sign a friendship treaty in 1945 in April when Tito met with Stalin in Moscow. And later that year, as the new socialist Yugoslavia dealt with growing pains and experienced some food shortages, the USSR stepped in to help and gave them aid. However, Stalin was also pretty vocal about the things he disagreed with Tito about. This is kind of like the rule. Like, if you're taking money from your parents, you don't get to complain so much about how they treat you, right?
And you are conceptualizing the USSR.
Daddy Stalin a little bit. I think it's a little Daddy Stalin. They got to go run to mom and dad to get a little. And it's not their fault. They just fought off the Nazis. They just came out of a war. They're a very small country. But it doesn't change the fact that they had to ask the USSR for aid. And when you go asking people for money, they feel more entitled to tell you how to live your life. Because they're like, well, look, clearly you're not living your life well. You're coming and asking me for money. So, and this is a family dynamic we see a lot. This happens with parents and children quite a bit.
Okay.
And I think that this kind of happened with them a little bit, right?
Now, so when in this, right? So when are we in the timeline?
Well, we're back to around 1945, end of the war.
So Yugoslavia was also one of the like founding charter members of the UN. Yes.
Oh, is that true? That might be accurate. Okay.
Socialist Federal Republic. I just Googled it.
Yeah, you Googled it. Okay.
Because I was like, I wanted the dates. They were one of the original signatories.
Signatories, yeah. Signatories.
Sure. Yeah, there we go. Of the UN Charter, June 26, 1945.
Okay, so this was right after,
right,
yeah.
Like the UN, not historically a body welcoming to global socialism.
No, not exactly. No, that is true. But the USSR was also very active in the UN, had veto power, and this was specifically because they didn't want to. Nobody wanted to start World War III again.
Yeah,
right. So in April 1945, you know, Soviet Union and Yugoslavia sign a friendship deal, and then the USSR gives them some aid while they're dealing with some growing pains after the war. But so then, as we said, Stalin gets a little vocal about some things where Stalin's like, I don't think you should do that, though. I don't know about that. So Tito thought, for example, Yugoslavia should include parts of Hungary, Austria, and other nearby countries. Stalin was like, take the L, let it go. Now's not the time to be weird about territorial disputes. So then Tito was like, hey, Stalin, why aren't you backing me up on this? And kind of gave a speech, kind of throwing shade at Stalin a little bit for not backing his territorial ambitions in this regard. You know, I kind of get where Stalin was coming from on this one. Another time, Yugoslavia forced a U.S. air Skytrain to crash land, an Air Force Skytrain, that's what it was. And the crew was captured and killed. And the USA was like, this was the USSR's urging, right? They did this. And Stalin was like, we did not do this. Also, I'm pretty annoyed, Yugoslavia, that you put us in a position to now have beef with the United States. My whole thing is I'm trying not to go to war with the United States right now. So Stalin was annoyed with that. Then Tito thought that Yugoslavia should have regional dominance over Albania, Bulgaria, and Greece. This was messy, though, because there were large pockets of ethnic Albanians in Yugoslavia. And Tito and Hoxha, right? Hoxha in Albania tried to merge Yugoslavia and Albania together. And Stalin was like, this is a little hasty. we just got out of a war. Could you guys chill? But he did publicly support it.
Hmm.
It was just like, you guys should wait for a more opportune time to do this, though.
Yeah.
Okay. But then, of course, Yugoslavia and Albania is like, why does USSR going to say over if we join up or not? Which they're kind of right.
No, and I think this, like, one of the things that has been, let's say, a running theme and the way we've talked is like two notions of nationalism, one of which it tends to try to want to make things aggregate in order to occupy a place on the world stage.
Yes.
Right. And that seems to have been Yugoslavia's position.
Right.
It's like, we would like to have the kind of territorial integrity that will make us
safer.
Safer.
Yeah.
Right.
So then the following year, Yugoslavia and Bulgaria sign a mutual assistance treaty, but they don't consult the USSR. And the USSR gets a little salty about it, but is still praising Yugoslavia publicly and saying, you know, like, this is a great example of socialism. Good job, Yugoslavia. But internally, they start to be a little petty. That's. I wonder if the listeners are going to hear Zay just yowling out loud.
Not. She put her face directly into the microphone
and then meowed. She literally walked straight up to the microphone just now and went straight into it. It was pretty cute.
She's acting sweeter than usual.
Well, she and I have a little thing going on. Okay. We're buds. Me and Zay, we're friends now. We hang out a lot. Zay is my partner's cat.
We'll see how long that lasts.
It's going pretty well.
We'll see.
She hasn't attacked me on live streaming.
We'll see how long. I am very familiar with cats' behavior.
Okay, all right. Well, for now, she likes me.
Yeah,
it's great. So, internally, the USSR starts to be like, Yugoslavia is getting a little out of control. They're getting a little hyphy. They're trying to do too much. Now, just as an interesting aside, around this time, 12 British Secret Service assets were airdropped into central Albania to try to start an anti-communist uprising against Hoxha. It didn't pan out, but...
This is the Kim Philby thing.
This, I thought, might be.
This is the Kim Philby thing.
So this is why I put this in there, because I was like, I wonder if this is
No, this is right, when Kim Philby is called by, like, John le Carre, he will do this, well, he's dead now, but John le Carre did this in his life where he'll be like, Kim Philby, mass murder. This is what he's talking about.
Really?
So Kim Philby would just like tell the Albanians, like, hey guys,
we're gonna send some people to you,
and those people would never return.
Right. Okay, got it. Okay, well, what happened here. This is what was happening around this time. So if you guys want to know about Kim Philby, this is a tie-in. Kim Philby. Yes, it's a tie-in to one of our bonus episodes over on our Patreon.
I think we did a whole goddamn series about the Cambridge Five. It was like 4 parts or something.
Yeah, but it was all over on our Patreon.
Really? Okay.
I think it's the Cambridge Five on our Patreon. Yeah. So go check that out on our Patreon. It's patreon.com/PickMeUpI'mScared. And it's very interesting. It's about double agents.
Who are all gay.
Who are all
bisexual. I don't want to do bisexual erasure.
They are queer in some capacity, double agents, defending the USSR most of the time.
There's one who's not queer, who's like the least interesting one, though. He's the one who his handler was like a CPUSA woman who just kept writing notes to the Soviet Union about how much they fucked.
Right. That was the straight guy. Token straight. You need a token straight.
Yeah.
So the USSR then is like, we're going to start to send advisors to Albania because what's going on with Tito and Hoxha. And Tito is like, why are you so obsessed with me and Albania? Me and Albania have a thing going on. What is going on here? It feels very paternalistic. I get it. So then Hoxha was also thought to have maybe killed a communist political opponent, and that sketched the USSR out a bit. And they were like, what if Yugoslavia is a bad influence on Albania now? And then Greece is going through a civil war. And Yugoslavia is supporting the Communist Party of Greece during this war, and Albania thinks that Greece might try to cut into Yugoslavia and Albanian territory, and the USSR is like, you're paranoid, this is not a thing. But then Tito and Hoxha conspire anyway to put military units near the Greek border, and Stalin is like, this is unnecessary, it's a little too hostile and weird.
Maybe it wasn't. All of these people have
this I have no opinion on. I don't know. Who knows what could have happened here? With Greece, right. I don't have enough knowledge.
We can only do counterfactuals.
Yes.
Right. We did just finish talking about the Armenian genocide, which meant we talk a
lot about Greece.
A lot about Greece and a lot about former Ottoman states and their extremely intense desire for like national self-determination in ways where the borders get real sketchy.
Yeah, the borders are a little loose. They're playing a little fast and loose with the borders. So during the war, Yugoslavia and Bulgaria also had talked about becoming a federation together. Now, this was Stalin's idea and recommendation and was like, let's do this, but it never materialized. But in 1948, the Bulgarian Workers' Party leader told Western journalists, yeah, we're going to do the federation with Yugoslavia. And then randomly was like, and Greece too. And USSR was like, wait, so Tito and Bulgaria and Greece have been secretly conspiring to do our plan, but add Greece into the mix, and they didn't talk to us about this?
I mean, that could have been sick.
This is weird. What is going on? But Tito was like, I actually don't know why the Bulgarian guy said that. We kind of gave up on that plan, and I'm not so interested in it anymore. So it turns out the Bulgarian guy was just kind of talking.
Can you imagine?
It would be so cool. So cool. The outfits, the hats. Oh. But this just ended up leading to even more weird tension between Tito and Stalin. So in February of 1948, Yugoslavia officials have this big meeting with Stalin. Tito, though, is not there. So it's some high up advisors, though, for Tito. And Stalin just kind of lays into them and is like, look, you guys are being kind of unmeasured. You're being kind of impulsive. You're moving weird. You need to stop this Greece shit or you're going to get us all nuked by the United States. We're in a politically sensitive time right now. We don't want a third world war. We just lost like 1 million people in the second one. And furthermore, if you're going to do this Bulgaria-Yugoslavia thing, you should do it immediately. And if you want, you can bring Albania into the mix to that later. And then, in this time, the Yugoslavian leaders listening to Stalin are like, oh, no, this makes sense. This makes sense. Our bad. You're right. We're so sorry. So they apologize and they agree to let the USSR take their lead on foreign policy because they're like, we're not so good at foreign policy. Your shit makes a lot more sense. We'll do that. So the Politburo of the Yugoslavian Communist Party hears about this when these guys get back and they're like, actually, Stalin was making a lot of sense. We think he was right. So we say that they can kind of take the reins on our foreign policy for a while. But the Yugoslavian Communist Party is like, what? Why would you just give over all control of our foreign policy to the USSR? Like,
again, I kind of see their point.
I see both sides. Yes, I'm like, that is weird to do. So the KPJ, who's the Yugoslavian communists, are like, the USSR just needs to stay out of our business. And the USSR was like, well, we could if your business wasn't so bad and fucked, basically. What's up with your economy, bro? And Albania is like, you know what? Like, Albania, Yugoslavia, BFFs forever. Let's make this happen. And Yugoslavia is like, you know what, USSR? We have our own friends now. Albania, we don't need you. So this just gets weird. Now,
that's it. And if you're picking powerful friends and you're picking
Albania over the USSR, yeah, I know. But Albania was their neighbors. It seems like they were buddies. Yeah. They were politically aligned. But it is just a whole mess. So, and this is why whenever I talk about the Sino-Soviet split, I just get annoyed. Like, whenever I hear about the communist powers fighting with each other, it is so annoying because it's like, we could have great things if you could just figure out how to work together here.
I mean, I have my own thoughts on this.
Do you?
We have talked. Well, no, we've talked about where I'm like, there's not a lot of like.
There's all communists.
There of the 20th century Cold War era communist powers. Not a lot left standing.
Not a lot left standing.
There's kind of a reason.
Whatever China did worked.
Yeah. That you know who they hung out with?
Who?
Kissinger.
No, no, you and your Kissinger was a Dengus thing. I cannot deal with that.
No, there's what's the Quinn Slobodian book where it's I think it's called Crack Up Capitalism.
I don't know.
Where it's like Milton Friedman and all of the like St. Curlin or whatever the fuck society people go to Hong Kong and all the special economic zones and so fucking sick. Hell yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. They would love that. Milton Friedman would love a Hong Kong special economic zone.
Because they're like, oh my God, it's like, right, like we've done away with any kind of like popular sovereignty and we're just doing capitalism.
Yeah, well, that's what they wanted. And that's why Milton Friedman was so mad that he couldn't even do the free market capitalism he wanted in the United States because we had too many federal restrictions outlawing it. Like there's shit in the Constitution that would interfere. So that makes sense. Okay, so March 27th, 1948 comes around, and Stalin is like, I'm going to write Tito a letter. So, Stalin.
Dear Yosef.
Yes, exactly. And he basically CCs one of the guys that he met with a month before on it, right? He adds,
okay,
but in a letter. So he writes it to both of them.
In carbon copy.
I mean, I don't even 48. They probably got carbon copy in 48.
I mean, presumably.
Yeah. But I think it's more like just like a handwritten letter with both
carbon copy.
I don't think it's actually carbon copy. I think he just writes them both a letter.
It's
a metaphorical CC.
He writes a letter in your imagination. Stalin, very busy man.
Yes. Dear Tito and friends.
Dear Yosef. And then he takes that letter and he puts it next to himself.
No, he wrote one letter with both of their names on it, is what I'm guessing.
Were they together when they received it?
Yeah, probably. They were in the Politburo together. Okay, so whatever. So he writes to him and he's like, hey, what are you doing over there? And Stalin is like, I don't know if you're still Marxist even. I don't know what's happening. You've got this weird anti-Soviet vibe you're cultivating. We've only ever publicly said nice things about you. And then Stalin was like, girl, are you a Trotskyist or something? Because if so, you might just end up like Trotsky did, just saying.
I mean.
Which is basically.
Like, I'm going to ice pick your dumbass.
Yeah, this is like a death threat. And then, but it's not that extreme, but it kind of is. So then Stalin is like, look, your party needs to get rid of your whack leaders. They were good revolutionaries, but they aren't the vanguard. Get yourself some real leadership ASAP because they're not handling this well. And Tito writes back. Tito's like, I'm gonna write back. And Tito's like, I think you're a fucking liar and I hate you. And everyone except for one guy in Yugoslavia ends up backing Tito on this. And it was like, yeah, we're not getting rid of our party leadership. They literally fought off Nazis and we like them.
To be clear, Tito had, as you sent me the fucking thing, written a like fuck Trotsky.
Yes. Tito was like, the Trotskyists are aiding and abetting the fascists in our revolution.
So presumably to be hit with
you're acting like Trotsky,
I'm gonna ice pick your dumb ass is extra special offensive to Tito.
Yes, exactly. Tito was like, I can't believe you would call me a Trotskyist like this. Whatever. So one dude is like, you know what? I think the USSR is right. Maybe actually the USSR didn't go far enough. Maybe we should just become a part of the USSR. And then everyone else in Yugoslavia, the Politburo, was like, traitor! And then he gets arrested. So on May 4th, Stalin writes back to Tito and is like, girl, I'm not a liar. I just see you and I'm reading you. And he's like, look, let's be absolutely for real right now. You would be nothing without us. So maybe you should just listen to us and trust us here. And if we can't figure this out between us, maybe we should let the common form be arbiters of our disagreement.
Mm-hmm.
Which, that's not a bad solution. But then Tito writes back and is like, fuck you, fuck the common form, basically. They're going to side with you because you're Stalin or whatever.
Yeah.
Which also kind of true.
I am going to say, I am going to be, when we get to the IMF stuff, whenever we do, your whole line about like if someone gives you money, you have to do what they say.
Yeah. IMF, I know, it's not great.
I'm just going to go ahead and say.
I would rather do what the USSR wanted than what the IMF wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Maybe the rule is a little weird.
Which rule?
If someone gives you money, you have to do with it. Like
it's just how it goes. They're going to expect you to do what they say. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Common Forum reaches out to Tito and is like, hey, Yugoslavia, we heard you might be having problems with USSR. Do you want to talk? And Tito is like, I don't know you. Keep my name out of your mouth. I don't want to talk to you. I'm never talking to you again kind of vibes. And then Stalin is like, are you serious, Tito? This makes you look like you have something to hide. What are you hiding? Why won't you talk to the Common Forum? And the Common Forum reaches out again and is like, are you sure you don't want to try to resolve this? And Yugoslavia is like, bitch, we said no. We said no. No. So on June 28th, the Common Forum publishes a write-up on this whole situation. And they say, look, Yugoslavia is being weird, uncomradely, and has some strange ideological errors going on over there. I don't even think they had ideological errors going on over there. If I'm being perfectly honest, nothing I saw, but whatever. They don't have enough democracy in their party, according to the Common Forum. I don't think that part is true. And they are not willing to accept criticism. this might have been true a little bit, but also,
Yeah, but it's
yeah, you got your own country, whatever. So everybody, it's like you kind of see what's going on here. So the Common Forum is like you are not trying to present a united communist front, and that's a big deal because the world is so fucked right now. Like, what are you doing? We need to stand together. And everyone kind of thought this would get the point across to Yugoslavia, and they'd be like, you know what, you're right. The world is bad. It's better that we stand together. But they did not do this.
Mhm.
Surprising to everybody, Yugoslavia was like, okay, fine. I guess none of us are friends anymore then.
Mhm.
We're breaking up with you.
I mean, they were legitimately the original non-aligned.
Well, this is when this happened.
Yeah, no,
This is this happening. So around 20% of the communists in Yugoslavia are kind of unhappy with this. They're like, I feel like we shouldn't piss off the USSR, but the majority of the members of the Yugoslav Communist Party agreed with Tito. It wasn't just Tito being weird. It was all of them being like, look, we expelled the Nazis. This is our country. I think we can handle our own foreign policy. Why does USSR think they get to control our foreign policy? Now, the ones that did side with Stalin and the USSR were purged. They were exiled, they were imprisoned, they were killed. And it was 51,000 people over this that were either, like I said, exiled, sent to jail, or just straight up murdered. It was so many people, in fact, that the Yugoslavian Communist Party had to create special prisons for the people they called commonformists.
Mhm.
People who side with the common form on this. So this officially is the Tito Stalin split.
Yeah.
It happens. They are not talking anymore. And within 2 years, the ill effects of this massive fallout get felt. Yugoslavia's trade deficit ends up soaring by 1,000%. Its 5-year industrialization plan gets severely disrupted. The USSR ends up putting an embargo against them, which is not cool.
Not cool.
Not cool. Economic warfare.
I'm going to say, even if you and your buds aren't talking right now,
it's just petty.
don't be petty about it.
Don't be petty about it. And the USA, what happens, this drives Yugoslavia straight into the arms of the West.
Yeah.
So the USA is like, this split is politically beneficial to us. An enemy of our enemy, the USSR, must be our friend. And the USA cozied up to Yugoslavia strategically. And Michael Parenti explains this in his book, To Kill a Nation, which is about Yugoslavia, and says, this was not the kind of country that global capitalism would normally countenance. Still, the United States tolerated socialistic Yugoslavia's existence for 45 years because it was seen as a wedge to divide the Warsaw Pact nations. The continued existence of Yugoslavia as a non-aligned socialist country also had the grudging support of the Soviet Union. Yugoslavia was a founding member of the United Nations and of the Non-Aligned Nations Conference, and a regular participant in UN peacekeeping missions. Internal CIA documents at this time said, the ultimate Soviet objectives in Yugoslavia remain the elimination of the Tito regime, the replacement of this regime by a government subservient to Moscow, and the political, economic, and military reintegration of Yugoslavia into the Soviet sphere. The following factors might indicate a Soviet intention to precipitate a satellite attack upon Yugoslavia during 1952. The increase in the capabilities of the armed forces of the satellites. The satellites adjacent to Yugoslavia have evacuated the majority of the civilians from key border areas. Soviet and satellite propaganda has attempted to erase the ideological difficulty connected with an attack on Tito by identifying Tito with fascism and denying that he even had an affiliation with communism. Tito was also charged with participating in Western preparations for future aggressions. So the CIA is like, holy shit, the USSR might straight up attack Yugoslavia.
Mhm.
And Yugoslavia propaganda, anti-Yugoslavia propaganda in the Soviet Union now is calling them all fascists and shit, which they're obviously not. However, ultimately the CIA was like, probably what will happen is the USSR will just realize Yugoslavia is not that worth it, and they'll just walk away, right? So what happens though when Yugoslavia gets abandoned by the socialist world? Well, the CIA writes, it is most unlikely that the Yugoslav government will have any alternative except to continue the present limited cooperation with the West. There seems no possibility of reconciliation between Tito and the Kremlin, and Yugoslavia has neither the military nor the economic strength to stand completely alone. However, in his relation with the West, Tito will make as few concessions as possible. He will resolutely defend Yugoslav independence and Yugoslav communism. He will probably be willing to develop closer economic and military relations with the free nations of Western Europe, but he's unlikely to join formally any of the groupings now organized or being organized. Within the UN, he will continue to oppose the Western powers on issues involving their former colonial possessions.
This is, I mean, Alexia and I talked about this briefly, but right, like there is like this like counterfactual history that you want to do where it's like, what if Bandung actually had material consequences?
Yeah.
And all of the sort of like non-aligned third world countries in material ways supported one another.
Yeah.
You do get like the fantasy version where it's like Yugoslavia doesn't rely upon, the United States or Western powers, because they end up relying upon like an Indonesia that also doesn't fall to like CIA plotting.
Right.
Right.
I mean, more and more, I'm convinced that the Juche ideology in the DPRK is the most practical one in a divided world.
In like, so essential self-reliance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean you don't trade and things like that, but it means that you don't need to trade to survive.
Yeah.
Zay is really excited right now.
Oh.
She likes this window. I'm friends with a cat now. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So we will see that the CIA was unfortunately pretty correct about Yugoslavia and their need to continue to cooperate with the West. Around the time that this assessment was written, for example, Yugoslavia had 325,000 men in their military with a highly skilled fighting ability, but they had virtually no proper military equipment. They didn't have spare parts. They couldn't do repairs on the equipment they had. They didn't have enough ammo. They didn't have enough armor. Their Air Force equipment was pretty much obsolete from a technological standpoint, and they didn't have much highly skilled planning staff. They were more of a guerrilla fighting group left over from fighting off the Nazis. And they didn't have the capability to produce new military equipment or even the parts they needed to repair things. So they were stuck with the West. They needed to do trade, at the very least, for weapons to survive. So in the 1950s, Yugoslavia enters this period where they start to take loans from the West in a really significant way. And we'll see that this ends up ultimately being something that makes conditions in Yugoslavia quite hard. So their aid that they receive from the United States grows rapidly in the 1950s. We have an internal CIA document from June 29th, 1951 that says, tensions between Yugoslavia and its Soviet satellite neighbors remains high, but there are no reliable indications of an imminent satellite attack. On the contrary, increasing Yugoslav ties with the West and the increasing Western commitment to Yugoslavia, particularly the initiation of arms aid to Yugoslavia, should serve to emphasize to the Kremlin the risks of general conflict inherent in any attack on Yugoslavia. So the CIA is like, we'll defend them. If the USSR messes with Yugoslavia, we'll defend Yugoslavia. So they say the Yugoslav leaders themselves apparently do not fear an attack in the immediate future and have noted no change in Soviet and satellite troop dispositions along the Yugoslav border since April. Yugoslav leaders are nevertheless cognizant of the threat and are proceeding with steps to improve their position vis-a-vis the satellites. Their attitude lacks the sense of frustration evident earlier in the year and is rather calm and a prudent approach looking towards the effective defense of Yugoslavia in both short and long-range terms. And the CIA continued to identify the utility of their relationship with Yugoslavia. They have multiple documents that came around the time. Another one lays it out very, very clearly and says, internally, Yugoslavia has developed far differently from the Orthodox communist country. And this is really important what we're going to read. This really explains the role that having a relationship with the West had on them and their ideology and the practice of their ideology. So the document goes on. For example, the Yugoslavs have rejected the collectivization of agriculture and insulation from world markets. The Yugoslav economy is a species of mixed economy in which competition and individual initiative play a role, and there's been some decentralization in political spheres as well. It's important to note that these developments almost certainly cannot be reversed. The changes inside Yugoslavia have been institutionalized and have developed a momentum of their own. Yugoslav relations with the West are too highly developed to be abruptly changed, and its economic dependence on the West is too great. Thus, there's little chance that Yugoslavia will again become a Soviet satellite.
So, right, like to go back to your earlier quote, where it was like Yugoslavia will continue to oppose the West on issues concerning former colonies, right? Yugoslavia is having to play kind of both sides here in like an extraordinarily confused way.
Yep.
Right. In the sense that they're both like, yeah, fuck the West, fuck these like colonial assholes. Also, we will be taking dictation from them in terms of some methods of how we run our economy.
Right, because they can't stand on their own. They
Yeah.
can't. So if they only have the options of the the communist powers or the capitalist powers, and the communist powers have shut them out.
And this, I mean, it does go back in a funny way to like the Tito Stalin split, in the sense that, like, if Tito's whole motive was to create a Yugoslavia that could stand on its own 2 feet, that would have included, like, all, potentially in Tito's mind, all of these territories that Stalin was like, dude, what are you fucking doing?
Yeah,
Right.
right.
It's a very confused.
Perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So it remains true, of course, that Yugoslavia is a communist country with a government and society not to our liking, the United States goes on and says. Nonetheless, the U.S. has gained by having a communist country successfully following its own path and not that of the Soviet Union. Moreover, the liberalization of Yugoslavia will probably continue, particularly after a new generation takes over. So the CIA, the United States government, knows young people are less likely to be committed to the socialist project. They don't remember life in capitalism. They don't remember how bad things were before communism. They're more likely to be interested in communism. So the United States is like, we're playing the long game. They're going to keep liberalizing things up. And by the time a new generation rolls around, they're going to be like, why are we even bothering with this communism thing anyway? Let's do rock and roll and blue jeans.
Honestly, I'm going to say that yielded great results. One of my favorite new wave bands is a Yugoslav band.
Really?
Video Sex.
Oh, that's a good name.
I love Video Sex.
Well, they were correct in this assessment, not only of Yugoslavia, but this is exactly what happened to many former Soviet and other former communist locations. So they go on and say, it also remains true that Yugoslavia disagrees with the U.S. over many international questions. Imperialism, right, obviously. So they say it must be kept in mind, however, that Yugoslavia does so from her position as an uncommitted and anti-colonial nation. And that, on the whole, her view of the outside world is not far different from that of some of our other neutral nations. Moreover, Yugoslavia's relation with the West probably restrain her from taking extreme positions, and to the extent that they do not, they provide the U.S. with leverage for exercising its influence. The U.S. has continued to benefit from its policies toward Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia remains independent of Soviet control, yet has achieved a rate of economic growth higher than any member of the Soviet bloc. In this position, Yugoslavia has been and remains a disruptive influence on the bloc, as a continuing example of the dangers of undue dependence on the Soviet Union and of the benefits of independent development. But independent development, we know it's not independent development. It's just development with the West instead of the Soviet bloc, right? So since 1948, they say, Yugoslavia has developed many ties with the West. It participates in several Western-oriented international organizations, and West Germany and Italy are Yugoslavia's most important trading partners. Indeed, Yugoslavia is economically dependent on its trade with the West. There's also much interchange with the West in the cultural, educational, and scientific fields, and Yugoslavia is open to Western ideas and influence. So, this development is obviously very, very different than most places that have a communist worker revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to set the stage for NATO coming in and feeling like they have access to Yugoslavia and deserve to take what they want later, like 50 years later. So in 1952, the USA is also sending Yugoslavia increased amounts of military equipment. For a period, Yugoslavia did adopt this neutralist kind of position that the United States was talking about. Heck, sometimes they were even kind of pro-imperialist on world events just to not upset the West. Now, the stuff the CIA was talking about regarding them not being a true communist country in the orthodox sense of the word, that's important to talk about. While Yugoslavia did remain on a path of a socialist construction, they also began to implement economic reforms that were more capitalist in nature. They abandoned the drive to collectivize agriculture in 1950, and 80% of their farmland remained in private hands as a result. Their industrial sector moved away from a planned economy. Worker self-management was introduced in 1950, which sounds good, but it's a little complicated to really figure out. So basically, factories, mines, carriers, transport, trade, agriculture, forests, public utility, and other state economic enterprises, as well as the general people's property, ended up getting managed by working collectives on behalf of the social community, and they said within the framework of the state economic plan. So these workers' collectives had the right of management through workers' councils. So this is almost like council communism.
I mean,
this is Tony Panakowic.
This is Italy in the 20s.
Right. So the idea was to give the workers more direct participation in managing the enterprises, which remain socially or state-owned, as a way to supposedly increase productivity. And in the first stage, the workers' councils and people's committees were generally just advisory bodies. But over the years, economic decision making got passed from the federal level to the republic level, and then to the local level, and then to them. So you basically had less centralized planning of the economy, and it became highly decentralized. And that gave way to more market socialism, especially at a regional level that did not develop like symmetrically across all because remember, Yugoslavia is super different, all these different regions, all these different nationalities.
Yeah.
So if all these localities are developing their own basically economic policy, they're not developing in sync. And what's that going to do? That's going to lead to increased ethnic tensions because their little nationality areas are divided heavily among ethnic and national lines.
So this is when Michael Parenti says that some of the ethnic conflicts can be mapped onto class conflict.
Yes.
This is what
he's talking about. And it's true. Certain areas did better in terms of trade. Those also happen to be areas primarily of one nationality, which led the other nationalities to be like, fuck that nationality. Things like this started to develop that previously had not been present, you know? So in the 1960s, Yugoslavia really gives into this market socialism era, but they also decide to take out massive loans from the West. So Parenti explains this and says, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, FRY, that's Socialist Yugoslavia, their leaders, not unlike communist leaders in other Eastern European countries, committed a disastrous error. They decided to borrow heavily from the West in order to simultaneously expand the country's industrial base, its export production, and its output of domestic consumer goods. But when Western economies entered a recession and blocked Yugoslav exports, thereby diminishing its export earnings, this created a huge amount of debt. And this massive debt began to develop its own interest-fed momentum, compounding on itself. So we've got the creditors, including the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which we've podcast episodes about those. If you want a more in-depth understanding of what they are, just go back and look at our older catalog. They demanded a restructuring of Yugoslavia, which, if you know anything about their policies, this is like a death sentence to social programs in your country.
We're on the Milton Friedman path.
We're on the Milton Friedman path. You got to start cutting out extra spending. You got to tighten things up. You got to do these austerity programs. You got to start giving us a lot of money. So restructuring, according to Parenti, consists of draconian austerity programs of neoliberal reforms. This is correct. Wage freezes, the abolition of state-subsidized prices, increased unemployment, the elimination of most worker-managed enterprises, and massive cuts in social spending. So the Yugoslavs were to consume less and produce more so that a larger portion of the national wealth could be directed towards meeting debt repayments. Now, from a worker self-management position, Yugoslavia moved into this market socialism, and this meant that basic productive forces would remain state-owned, but the market would decide what would be produced and sold. The Federation government would play a huge role in redirecting resources to less developed republics and also to Kosovo. However, its role in overall investment would decline. So basically, the federal government started acting in service to the smaller and more local governments, which decentralized everything even further. And we know in communism, you're supposed to have a centrally planned economy. Well, this is very decentralized and a little bit chaotic. In 1961, 62% of investment financing came from government sources. By 1968, nearly 80% came from enterprises or domestic banks. So the flip and more went from 62% being government sources, and 7 years later, 80% came from private enterprise and banks.
And it worked out fabulous.
It did not. So market socialism ended up strengthening the bourgeois and petite bourgeois elements of Yugoslav, like society. But this meant across the board in every area, right? But in particular, more than everywhere, in Croatia and Slovenia. Mm-hmm. So enterprises and banks under self-management in these wealthier republics like Croatia and Slovenia, they were more likely to invest and make loans and increase production in their own borders, meaning in Croatia and Slovenia. So political and economic decentralization would actually lead people to not think of themselves as Yugoslavian in the region anymore, like we talked about as a result of this. If you were Croatian and you were doing really well and you looked at Albanians and you're like, oh, we're doing better than them, you'd be like, we Croatians are doing better than the Albanians. So what ended up happening is people started thinking about themselves in highly nationalistic terms again.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like reverse everything that Tito had worked for during the revolution. So economic disparity emerged to be this pretty serious thing between regions and republic. This created ethnic and nationalist antagonisms between these different geographical areas. So Slovenia, Croatia, and the Vojvodina province of Serbia. That was one of the, Serbia had the 2 autonomous zones. Was Vojvodina the other autonomous zone, or was that just a random province? Maybe that wasn't the
I
autonomous
can't
zone.
remember that. I will say Michael Parenti also makes the point that the autonomous zones, as they function within Yugoslavia, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this, like end up also becoming like a huge stay on the capacity of Yugoslavia to operate.
Yep. Because they end up taking from the federal government, they're not giving back. Yeah. So I can't remember if Vojvodina was the other. I don't think it was the autonomous. I think it was just another region of Serbia. So Slovenia, Croatia, and this one province of Serbia had the highest per capita income, and they were very, very economically developed compared to the rest of the country. Croatia ended up becoming the center of tourism because it had this huge coastline, right, that people like to visit. The poorest areas, on the flip side, were the republics of Macedonia and Montenegro and the province of Kosovo in Serbia. So, meanwhile, in Kosovo, the traditionally Serbian portion of the name, Metohija, was just dropped, and the region was renamed the Socialist Autonomous Province of Kosovo. So this was, a self-governing region completely. It had hardly any ties to the rest of Serbia, and this was based on this Marxist-Leninist idea of the right to self-determination for oppressed people, but that, coupled with the highly decentralized economy, just meant that things got really, really unequal very fast.
Forgive me, I'm trying to remember Parenti's point about how internal migration worked among sort of like ethnic groups within Serbia, where it became a source of resentment after Yugoslavia's dismemberment in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, he does talk about this a lot, and he's like, people did move around a lot.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that too when we talk about the fighting that breaks out. A lot of the fighting was just against ethnic minorities in general, not a minority. So you might be in a region that's primarily one ethnic group, and then a group of extremists emerges, extremist nationalists emerge, and then they start killing everybody from every other ethnic minority. But there'd be this long history of like why there were so many people from this ethnic minority that were there because of this migration pattern that occurred because of this conflict. And it did create this really complicated internal migration patterns, that also led to people feeling resentment, I guess. So, 1970s, market socialism had introduced all these petty bourgeois elements into Yugoslavia, but the fact that it wasn't just straight up capitalism meant that they had still improved conditions in the region dramatically by the 1970s compared to certainly before the war. Real per capita income in Yugoslavia by 1975 had tripled based on a comparison to the 1939 level. So even with this, they were still doing way better, basically, than they had been under the king when they were Yugoslavia before World War II.
Yeah.
Before their communist revolution / fighting off the Nazis 2 in 1.
Forgive me, do you mind if I may make an observation?
Yeah.
You do.
What?
I was joking.
Yes, I do mind.
Right, the United States entered a period of like insane growth and prosperity after the war because of essentially military Keynesianism.
Yeah.
That was not the case for like most of Europe.
Right.
Like
they
I just
struggled.
like this is like if you look at like Italy or France or England or whatever, it's like, oh yeah, you guys had 20 years of struggle after that.
Right. So it's not like you can look at this and say, well, everybody was prosperous during that time.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. So this was unique. Yes, that is a good point to make. So industrial development had increased 9 times in the same period. And in places like Montenegro, it increased 40 times in the same period. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Yugoslavia's economic growth rate was one of the highest in the world. Education, healthcare, food, shelter, the right to employment or income, social services were all still guaranteed, even though they were in this market socialist system. By the late 1970s, Kosovo had one of the highest percentages of students in the world as well. However, nationalist and cessationist movements were popping up all over Yugoslavia, inspired by the economic disparity between the regions. And this led to some reforms to try to stop this. So Tito and the rest of the Yugoslav leadership thought if the republics were given more powers, there would be no reason to secede.
Mm-hmm.
So they ultimately made concessions to nationalism.
So Tito was basically like, listen, if we give you the rope to hang us, you won't use it.
Exactly. And this ended up not being strategically a good move, right? Because the way to combat nationalism is to not allow people to fall deeper into their nationalist mini identities and view everybody else around them as in a we they lens that exacerbates your nationalistic and ethnic tensions.
I mean, another way of saying that might be like disaggregating nation and ethnicity from class difference as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, not great.
Yeah.
Not a great move. So in 1971, a new constitutional amendment is done to do just this. And by 1974, this new constitution was solidified and it basically made Yugoslavia into more of a confederation. The federal government was still there, right? And it was responsible for things like defense, foreign policy, issuing currency, and providing assistance to the economically less developed areas of the country. But the new constitution reduced the power of the central government and increased the power of places like Kosovo. Under the new constitution, no important decision could be taken at either the federal government or party level without the agreement of all of the republics and the autonomous regions. The party also ended up getting restructured. So instead of developing into one unified communist party, each republic had its own party with its own Congress, its own central committee, and its own executive committee all the way down. And these reforms did exactly the opposite of what people were hoping they would do in central leadership. They did not make people feel like they were more empowered and therefore would be happier. I think they got this idea maybe from the right of marginalized people to self-determination. But the problem is these weren't all marginalized people. Some of these were highly empowered, economically mobile people. And you were just like, yeah, do nationalism harder, babe. What could go wrong?
I mean, if we're speculating wildly about the
We are.
motives of people long dead,
Let's do it.
I will say this feels like something having its own momentum, which is like, you guys are kind of disintegrating over here. And so you keep being like, if we just allow, if we are in charge of the disintegration, then we are in charge still.
Right.
Like that feels
right. No, that does make sense. So while all this is happening though, and everyone's like, yeah, that's right, we are empowered to be our own little mini ethno state. In Kosovo, Albanian nationalists started this campaign of basically ethnic cleansing. They started trying to drive out the Serbs, Montenegrins, Roma, and other non-Albanians out of the province en masse. And bourgeois nationalistic forces were growing basically in every single corner of Yugoslavia. So the 1980s comes along, and Tito dies. Not great for the economic unity of a fracturing place torn apart by imperialism and decentralization, right? By the 1980s, living standards for all nationalities had greatly improved over 40 years, but the gap between the rich and poor areas was still wide. Slovenia, for example, the wealthiest of the republics, still produced 10 times more than Kosovo did. Attempts were made to close these gaps by doing a bunch of market reforms, but it didn't work well. What ended up happening was the party and state would subsidize economic and social development in poor republics, provinces, and regions, while the rich republics would give a fixed percent to a federal fund for those less developed areas. So in 1988, Kosovo received 48% of that fund. Bosnia-Herzegovina received 25%. Macedonia received 18%. Montenegro received 9%. The less developed areas also received federal assistance for public services and preference in getting loans from foreign banks and institutions. And the loans went basically to places like Kosovo, but the repayment obligation would go to the federation as a whole. So then the richer areas were not only paying higher taxes to subsidize the poorer areas, they were also literally paying back the loans of the poorer areas as well.
So this is when extraordinarily petulant type California tech bros are like, listen, bro, we're the fourth largest, whatever.
We are the fourth largest economy, yeah.
No, I mean, they're saying true thing, but they're like, why should we have an obligation to Alabama?
Exactly.
Right.
It's like this entirely. Yes. They're like, we should just secede and do our own country. Fuck which Alabama.
Is some of the dumbest bullshit.
I know, it's really crazy. The California secessionist people are insane. And I actually use them a lot as an example. When people are trying to talk about like a Taiwan secession movement, and you're like, bro, you know, only 4.4% of people in Taiwan immediately want to leave China, right? People don't usually know that. And I'm like, this is literally the equivalent of Iran showing up and arming a California secession movement that's like a couple hundred guys we don't know or agree with. I always use that example because I'm like, that's how crazy it is.
Sorry,
how
like,
the
you
United
say
States
that,
backs
and that
these.
sounds cool to me.
Okay.
Like, I don't want it to happen, but like
But it would work on you. If
No,
Iran was like, we're going to give these tech bros nuclear weapon capabilities so that they can secede from the United States.
You know my thing about not being yelled at by graphic designers?
No.
If I explain this to you?
No.
Okay, this is if I go to like a punk type show or whatever, I don't want to be yelled at about veganism by a graphic designer. Right. I want to be actually scared. And this is a part of my personality that is just an edgelord hater who wants Gigi Allen, who wants something scary.
No, I do. You have talked about this in other forms. I think your ideology on this has solidified into a very marketable. I think you've really honed in on it. I think you've really done something beautiful with this sentiment. Yes.
I said this the other day at a show to someone who was like, I'm a graphic designer, vegan.
And you're like, great, don't join a band. I don't want to hear it.
He was the singer of a band. And I was
like, perfect. Stop that.
You really, like, you need to get face tattoos or something. Because this is not going to work. But
get rid of your car, only take the subway.
Yeah. Maybe jump on the tracks on the subway every now and again just to
feel alive. Yeah.
But right, like, there's a part of me that if Iran showed up with like a bunch of like AKs and just like started arming like freaks in Humboldt County, I would be like, that's funny.
It is funny.
Like,
it is funny, and that is basically what the U.S. government is trying to do in Taiwan. Don't get it confused. Yeah. So this is all what's going on in Yugoslavia when Tito dies, and the IMF starts tightening its grip on the country. The IMF's first austerity program gets imposed on Yugoslavia, and this leads to widespread layoffs and cutbacks. Neoliberal shock therapy basically starts to set in, and living standards start to decline. All of the social programs they loved so much that had helped keep them afloat, those start disappearing really, really, really fast. And yeah, people are losing their jobs because a lot of these are government jobs, and the government has to cut its spending to pay back these loans to the IMF. So these austerity plans do what they always do, which is they make an economic crisis way worse, they foster widespread discontent, and they make these countries more likely to be indebted to the IMF and World Bank in the future. They don't actually help improve their economy.
Okay, this is another stupid non sequitur. I am occasionally EU skeptical because of the ways in which like companies like or countries like Germany tend to exert power over the economic policies of poorer countries within the EU.
Yeah.
This famously happened in 2009, 2010, in places like Greece and Spain.
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of how like the West operates towards its satellites.
Right. Well, maybe the EU will get a mass worker revolution uprisings.
You say that like you know something I don't.
Marx. So the 1980s, when reliance on these imperialist banks started to lead to like these economic crises, the nationalist idea got an even wider audience, right? Because everybody was like, well, what if basically we didn't have to deal with all these other people? We could figure this out on our own. Croatia and Slovenia, which were wealthier, were getting more and more upset that they were having to subsidize these poorer areas. And also, even poorer areas like Kosovo, for example, were starting to get annoyed with the setup too. So the CIA actually has a declassified document about this that was released on April 11th, 1986, called Yugoslavia's Anti-IMF Tactics. And it basically said, as early as 1985, Yugoslavia was planning on relaxing some austerity measures. So if you know anything about the IMF, they hate that shit, right? So
yeah, this is...
What would it look like for a country to relax austerity measures?
It would mean essentially like, hey guys, we're not going to repay our fucking loans because we have to eat.
Exactly. We got to give people health care again.
Yeah.
We got to give people unemployment insurance. We got to give them guaranteed jobs. We got to take care of our people. They're dying. And the IMF is like, we are not into that. So this report talks about some of the impacts of the IMF's hyper-capitalism nightmare planning shit show for Yugoslavia as a condition of loan repayment. The main issue, it says, is the IMF insistence that Yugoslavia adopt real interest rates, thereby halting a de facto subsidy to insolvent industries. Since being applied last year, interest rates soared to meet the record 80% inflation of 1985, and there were several serious impacts. Some firms, once thought totally viable, ended up going to debt. The most insolvent firms reported interest payments higher than their gross income. And private individuals and organizations with large deposits and savings accounts made a fortune at these high
So
interest rates.
this is like terminal velocity for debt, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, if your interest rate is higher than all the money you're bringing in,
there's no way you're ever going to pay it back. It's a
Right.
mathematical impossibility. So nationalism is really cementing itself as this goes on. By the late 1980s, the communist parties of all the regions had either collapsed or just adopted nationalist parties. Now, remember, the nations at play here are Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Serbia. And then in Serbia, we have two autonomous regions. One is Vojvodina. It was an autonomous region. I was right. Okay. And they have a large Hungarian-speaking minority. And the other is Kosovo, or aka Kosovo Metohija, but they lost the last part of the term Kosovo, with an 80 to 90% ethnic Albanian majority. So Kosovo, though, is regarded by Serbs as the place of origin of their nation. And parts of Kosovo, particularly the north, are overwhelmingly Serbian, even though it's mostly Albanian. And a right-wing nationalist movement ends up arising in the early 1980s that would start to terrorize Serbs, Roma, Turkish, and other non-Albanians, seeking to ethnically cleanse Kosovo for Albanians, basically. And the Yugoslav federal government responded with measures against the nationalists, but some of these measures actually just made the situation way worse. Fork, make good decisions. Fork! Fork just tried to eat the planter.
Oh.
Yeah. She was thinking about it.
Poison plant?
Well, no, but I just planted it and I don't want her to eat it. She was looking at it. She's like, that looks tasty.
Well, why
she can only reach the bottom.
Why do you have things that Ford wants if Ford can't have them? That seems like a you problem.
Well, I think it is. I think I got to move the plant up higher now. It's so cute though. She thought she was getting away with it. She was all sneaky walking up to it. I'm like, I can see you. So, 1984, Ronald Reagan has a U.S. national security decision regarding policy towards Yugoslavia. And it's labeled secret and sensitive, and it's called Directive 133. And it basically lays out these objectives aimed at Eastern Europe on the whole, one that would call for a quiet revolution to overthrow communist governments while, quote, reintegrating the countries of Eastern Europe into the orbit of the world capitalist market. So the economic reforms that Yugoslavia was forced to take on by the IMF was basically with the goal of transforming everything there into a private capitalist enterprise. So 1987, we're going to check in with Kosovo really fast, because we got to kind of understand what's going on in Kosovo while this is going on. Between 1945 to 1998, something had been happening in Kosovo under its autonomous self-management outside of the rest of Yugoslavia. The ethnic minority population, it started out as 60% Serbs, Roma, Turks, Gorani, and Montenegrins, etc. That had dropped to just 15% by 1998. So they basically got rid of a whole bunch of ethnic minorities. And remember, this is also where a right-wing nationalist movement that had been terrorizing ethnic minorities kind of had started to come around. So Albanians had, yes, been ethnically cleansing this region of anyone who wasn't Albanian. And the result was that the ethnic Albanian population grew from 40% to 85%. But these were these like weird right-wing nationalist freakazoid groups that emerged. In 1987, the New York Times wrote, ethnic Albanians in the provincial government have manipulated public funds and regulations to take over land belonging to Serbs. Slavic Orthodox churches have been attacked and flags have been torn down. Wells have been poisoned and crops burned. Slavic boys have been knifed. Some young ethnic Albanians have been told by their elders to go rape Serbian girls. And the Slavs flee the protracted violence. Kosovo is becoming what ethnic Albanian nationalists have been demanding for years, an ethnically pure Albanian region. Mm-hmm. So as the nationalist tensions rise, Albania is like, bet, we're just going to build an Albanian ethno-state. And they're doing it in these semi-official ways, and they're doing it just basically by people, average everyday people, being nationalistic right-wing weirdos.
And Parenti, this is where Parenti mentions a lot of in-migration, right? Where
yes.
It's like a lot of people moving into the region.
Well, and now they're moving out. Yeah. They're fleeing. So remember, 60% of the region had been Serbs, Romas, Turk, Gorani, Montenegrins. Within 50 years, 45 percentage points of those people had just left and gone to other areas. So this affects things as well. So how did this happen in Kosovo in just 50 years? There's a few ways. Number one, Kosovo's status as an autonomous region meant that it got its own Supreme Court and its own Albanian flag. Two, university education was in Albanian. Textbooks were in Albanian. Instructors were Albanian. And number three, there was Albanian media everywhere. Number four, university classes were taught in Albanian language, which was very, very different than Serbo-Croat. And number five, despite making up only 8% of Yugoslavia's total population, they received 30% of the federal development credits that the country was receiving, which included 24% of the World Bank development credits alone, which were used by the Kosovo authorities, yes, to purchase land from the Serbs and give it to Albanians.
I am going to say the Albanian flag goes pretty fucking hard.
Is it a good-looking flag?
I mean, it also is redolent of certain other types of flags.
Oh, it does look cool.
It does look cool.
It looks kind of vaguely Nazi-ish.
It also looks vaguely Nazi.
Ah, Albania.
Two things can be true.
Two things can be true at once. So yeah, they're doing some fucked up shit over in Kosovo in the name of Albania. You can see though how with all these measures they were like, yeah, Kosovo's the Albania place. What are you talking about? We're Albanian. We're Albanian Kosovo in their hats. Despite all of this, though, Kosovo was still lagging behind the rest of Yugoslavia in development. They had a lot of corruption at their local government levels, and they weren't really planning things well. So in 1987, then new president of the Serbian Communist Party, can you guess who it is?
Slobodan Milosevic.
Yep, it's Milosevic, used this to come up with his argument against the Albanian secessionists who are popping up in the region, right? Albanian secessionists were like, look, we're basically just our own Albanian people in our own Albanian place. Why don't we just become our own Albanian country? And he was like, no, that's weird. We're not doing that. So pretty quickly, though, the USA was like, no, it's Milosevic who's trying to build the nationalist movement. And internal CIA talking points on Yugoslavia from October 3rd, 1988 read, the push by Serbian party chief Milosevic for his Serbian nationalist agenda is increasing the chance of a national political confrontation or widespread violence in the coming weeks. So the fact that he was like, I don't think we should be an Albanian ethno-state, everyone was like, so you want a Serbian ethno-state?
Yeah.
But people close to Milosevic are like, this guy was not like a Serbian nationalist at all, right? So this was weird to them. But the United States was like, he must have a weird Serbian ethno-state agenda. And this kind of designation of him would stick and unfairly follow him for the rest of his life. So they said Milosevic's immediate goal is for the Republic of Serbia to gain greater control over its two autonomous provinces, Kosovo and Vojvodina. If this was true, I would think this would make sense because the autonomous nature was basically giving them too much power and they were kind of starting to do fucked up things. Like Kosovo was trying to build an Albanian ethno-state, for God's sake. They said he is trying to intimidate other regional leaders into supporting constitutional amendments that would strengthen Serbian authority by encouraging massive Serb demonstrations in their regions. We believe Milosevic's longer-term goal probably is to reestablish Serbia's hegemony in Yugoslavia with himself as the dominant Tito-like leader. Again, there's not really evidence of this. Milosevic has strong grassroots support among Serbs and is determined to push ahead against all odds, but he faces strong obstacles. Most other regions bristle at Milosevic's aims and tactics and are trying to preserve the current regional balance and consensual decision-making system. That's true. He was really the person who was the most adamantly fighting back against these nationalist tendencies. And Milosevic's support in the Serbian party may not run deep, and it could erode quickly if he fails to make progress on his agenda. Is Fork being weird?
Fork's being weird now.
Fork, are you being weird? Yeah, she wants attention so bad. So, it's past her dinner time. That's why. Her dinner time was 30 minutes ago. We'll do like 15 or 20 more minutes of this episode, and then it'll have to be a part 3. Okay, so nationalist leaders, it goes on to say, are taking modest first steps towards constraining Milosevic. The Communist Party leadership several days ago adopted stands that appear to give Serbia only minor constitutional changes. Most republics seem to have curtailed Serb demonstrations in their regions, depriving Milosevic of a political tool. Milosevic, nonetheless, will continue to push hard for his agenda in the run-up to a National Central Committee plenum sent for October 17th. I mean, look, his agenda is literally just like, don't let the Albanians build an ethno-state here. Nationalism bad. I kind of agree with that.
I mean, you can't put the cork back in the bottle here. It feels like
it's already happened.
Like,
So demonstrations in Kosovo and Serbia, they say, may turn violent, and Milosevic could still refuse to accept nationally agreed policies. Now, a few days later, we get another internal document that says Yugoslavia faces its most severe internal threat to stability since 1948. Serbian national assertiveness could trigger a backlash among Slovenes and Croats, possibly leading to a major showdown over Yugoslavia's federal structure. And it is true that there was some Serbian nationalism there too, not necessarily Milosevic, but there's Serbian nationalists in the mix also. All of these nationalists are in the mix now.
Even Parenti mentions like Serbian paramilitary
groups.
Like as a thing.
So every ethnic group is basically developing their own nationalist, far-right, paramilitary-backed movement in Yugoslavia.
Why, when you talk to people who lived through that period, there is a very neighbor against neighbor, like blood running in the streets kind of thing.
I mean, it's absolutely wild. It's unhinged. All these people got like spooked into right-wing like nationalist kookballery, and it was not good. It was not good. So, as this is happening, 1989 to 1998, Yugoslavia has already been viciously economically attacked by the IMF and the World Bank. Mm-hmm. Had its weaknesses exploited by the United States and the imperial powers. Mm-hmm. After being abandoned by the USSR.
Yeah.
They've had a hard one. And so what happens from 1989 to 1998? Balkanization.
Yeah, and this obviously serves the West more broadly very well, because they're like, oh my God, like look at all of these like little tiny states that we can just like run like they're Chile.
Exactly. So the United States sets its sights on Yugoslavia, seeking a massive switch to a neoliberal, pro-capitalist market. Now, we could stop here and we could have balkanization be its own episode.
But
it's kind of long. We could go a little bit more. I feel like we've only been recording for like an hour and 15 minutes or something.
Why don't we go 10 more minutes?
Okay. So Parenti explains the United States' goals in trying to switch Yugoslavia to this massive neoliberal free market paradise. Natural resources, completely accessible to transnational corporate exploitation, including the enormous mineral wealth in Kosovo. Mm-hmm. An impoverished but literate and skilled population working at subsistence wages, basically a cheap labor pool that would help, Western Europe and the rest of the West. Dismantled petroleum, engineering, mining, fertilizer, pharmaceutical construction, automotive, and agricultural industries, so they no longer offer competition against Western producers. Basically, he says U.S. policymakers wanted to abolish Yugoslavia's public sector service and social programs using the same shock therapy imposed on the former communist countries of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. The ultimate goal has been the complete privatization and third worldization of Yugoslavia, Eastern Europe, and, for that matter, every other nation. It is to replace the social wage with a neoliberal global free market, a process that would deliver still greater wealth and power into the hands of those at top. So, 1989, counter-revolution in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union begins. In Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia, some of the bourgeois parties that arose... Oh, no. My alarm, that's usually when I stop work. We're recording at a weird time today.
Sorry about it.
That's okay. Some of these bourgeois parties that arose had very chauvinist or fascist policies inspired by these nationalist movements now. And the World Bank and the IMF forced bankruptcy across a ton of firms in Yugoslavia, which meant that 600,000 people were laid off in the period of 1989 and 1990 alone. Mm-hmm. So 600,000 people lose their job in 2 years.
Yeah.
The country's already feeling very nationalistic. Imagine you've got a bunch of, if you're American, imagine a bunch of MAGA people now have lost their job. And they're living under a Kamala Biden presidency. How happy do you think they're going to be?
This is right. Like, certain historical conjunctions lend themselves extraordinarily well to right-wing reaction.
Are you talking about Nazis?
Oh, I was talking about right now, right here.
Oh, right here, right now. Everywhere. It's everywhere.
No, I am very, like you're like, maybe the EU will go communist. I'm like, maybe the EU is
full fasci.
Yeah,
maybe. So, Parenti talks about this period too, and he says tens of thousands of Yugoslavs were forced to find employment as guest workers in West Germany, Switzerland, etc. Industrial production plummeted to less than 3% of an annual growth rate from 7%, and then ultimately fell to negative 10% by 1990. The IMF and World Bank financial aid package allowed for an influx of imports and unrestricted foreign capital, which led to a further slump in domestic production. Transfer payments from Belgrade to the republics were frozen, again undermining the federal fiscal structure. And the drastic economic depression induced by IMF restructuring in turn helped fuel the ensuing ethnic conflicts and secessionist movements. So, meanwhile, the United States is like, hey, Yugoslavia, we're going to cut off aid unless you hold elections in 1990. But these elections would be totally compromised by the United States, of course. The National Endowment for Democracy, which we also have an entire podcast series about, as well as other CIA fronts, other NGOs that are funded by the US government, they all spent a ton of money giving money to campaigns there, basically, to anybody who would advance this conservative, separatist kind of political aim. So the US media called these pro-West democratic opposition, but it would literally be people who were nationalist and wanted to facilitate the breakaway of these different areas of Yugoslavia and were anti-communist. So these parties were obviously able to spend a ton of money because all of Yugoslavia is very economically depressed at this time, and the United States came in with a bunch of cash and threw them at these types of political candidates we wanted in office, and they were able to outperform, and they ended up gaining electoral edge in like every single part of Yugoslavia except for Montenegro and Serbia. So the West pushed the idea that these different regions of Yugoslavia should secede through all this political messaging, and Slovenia closed its borders and basically made it illegal to have any demonstrations in favor of seceding from Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, we know what's happening. Fuck this. So Milosevic then led the charge for Kosovo to no longer have total widespread authority above federal policies, in part because of their treatment of the ethnic minorities in their borders. He was like, hey, this is crazy. Kosovo's got too much power. They're mad with power, and they're trying to build an Albanian ethno-state. Somebody's got to do something. So then Albanians were like, fuck you, we're boycotting the federal government then, including your elections, and we are building our own governments instead.
And obviously, I mean, we've talked about this with like Ukraine or whatever, where it's like, presumably the US is going to come in and be like, look at the election, like the suppression of democracy.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. This is what happens. I think we can get through this whole section before we get to the United States really stepping in.
Okay.
All right. So economic discontent in Yugoslavia mounts. By 1991, the debt has grown to $31 billion. Unemployment is estimated at 20%. Inflation is 200%. International creditors are fully in charge of Yugoslavia's monetary policy. Their state banks get dismantled. The federal government no longer has access to its own central bank. And this economist, Michel Chossudovsky, says the country was, quote, carved up under the close scrutiny of its external creditors, its foreign debt carefully divided and allocated to the republics, each of which was now committed to decades of debt payments. And Parenti said, with a few strokes, the international creditors dismembered the FRY, the Socialist Yugoslavia, and put a fiscal headlock on the newly independent republics. Now, the CIA and other U.S. leaders, while this was happening, were actively encouraging the divide and conquer strategy in Yugoslavia. This has been popular in U.S. foreign policy everywhere, Vietnam, Korea, etc. So the United States began subtly and quietly pushing for self-determination in Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Montenegro, ultimately trying to dissolve the socialist Yugoslavia into smaller and more exploitable states that would operate as neo-colonies of the West, while denying this completely to the public eye. Other U.S. moves to fragment Yugoslavia came about when the Bush administration would pressure Congress into passing the 1991 Foreign Operations Appropriation Act. This law would say we're only going to give foreign aid to the individual republics, not Yugoslavia as a whole. And they also would give arms shipments and military advisors that would be basically hitting Slovenia, Croatia, coming in, not just from the United States, but also from Germany and Austria.
I do love that, right? Like they can openly be like, we will be arming the rebels.
Yes.
I will say the Contras had just happened. And so I love Daddy Bush.
Yes, Papa Bush, Bush Sr.
Who has no connections to the security state. He like with being like, look, we're just going to openly do this.
Yeah.
We're not going to lie about it. It's not going to be weird.
It's the Trump book.
Yeah.
Trump doctrine. Yeah. So Germany was even more publicly than that, aggressively pushing for civil conflict in Yugoslavia amongst the ethnic tension lines. And the rest of Europe decides to get involved too. The EU community with US involvement in 1991 actually has a conference on Yugoslavia that says they need to create sovereign and independent republics.
Where are we on the thing? Because I have Bosnia is currently a candidate for EU membership.
Oh.
And I was talking to someone who is Bosnian.
We're nowhere near Bosnia yet. We're in 1991. We're not there yet. Okay. There's going to be multiple episodes. So, in June of 91, Slovenia and then Croatia, having been supported ideologically, materialistically, militaristically by the United States and Germany, are like, we're independent from Yugoslavia officially.
Germany's really bounced back, I gotta say.
Yeah, they really did in just a few short years.
It's like that denazification went so well.
That they were like, how do we support people building ethno-states in Kosovo?
Yeah, there were no Nazis in the German government in the 60s, 70s, 80s. That didn't happen.
Yeah. So they were frustrated, right? Because they'd been needing to support the poorer regions during the IMF kind of restructuring and all that. Remember, because Slovenia and Croatia were the wealthier areas. So in Slovenia, a 10-day war breaks out between the Slovene militia and the Yugoslav army. Slovenia wins pretty quickly. So Slovenia becomes the first breakaway republic of the former Yugoslavia. In 1991, Slovenia did 2/3 of its business with other parts of Yugoslavia. Within a decade of declaring their independence, though, like all of those business deals shifted to the West. 70% of their commerce started getting handled by the EU. So the West got what it wanted. It got access to their business and the free market capitalist interests they had. Slovenia actually did kind of the best out of all of the other breakaway states, maybe. They were also able to resist the totalitarian nature of the capitalist kind of austerity reform measures, the shock doctrine kind of thing, right? They were able to get away with just privatizing half of their state-run enterprise instead of all of those. And they didn't have to deal with foreign takeovers of industry and land until 1999. They also got to keep their welfare programs intact and their pension programs intact. So their economy was still pretty mixed, and that helped them fare better. But the West was like, this is a problem, obviously. The Economist wrote at the time that if Slovenia actually wanted to join the EU, it would have to drop a lot of its, quote, protectionist and nationalist rules. Not even nationalist rules, really, at the time, just like market control. Businesses remarked that the pay was too high for workers in Slovenia, and the workers had too many rights and protections.
I love that as generally speaking, when you are taught capitalism in high school,
yeah,
or whatever, it's like, no, the free market is what guarantees worker rights and high wages because of competition.
Right, that's how they try to sell it to you. Yeah,
right.
They do in school, yeah.
I'm just this is the top line.
Yeah. And we're like, no.
The capitalists themselves are like,
no, the free market keeps the wages low. Open those markets up to press these workers.
This is why we want the free market. We want cheap
labor. Right. So that was in Slovenia. Now, remember, there were two countries that were wealthier that broke away first. The other was Croatia. So in Croatia, the self-declared Serbian Autonomous District of Krajina said it was still a part of Yugoslavia and was, in fact, seceding from Croatia. So there was an area of Croatia that was like, we don't want independence. We're still Yugoslavia. So this leads to this conflict inside of Croatia that would last years. And this would be called the Croatian War from 1991 to 1995. Croatian forces would carry out ethnic cleansing against Serbs at the time who wanted to remain a part of Yugoslavia. Now, in this new seceded Croatia, the president, Franjo Tudjman, led this basically just straight up fascist government, as far as I could tell. It did not look good. I need water.
Wait, what was the flag?
The flag? Oh, yeah, look up the flag.
Okay.
So, Franjo Tudjman, in 1989, had written a book, just so you know what kind of man we're dealing with, that claimed the establishment of Hitler's new European order could be justified by the need to get rid of the Jews. Mm-hmm. He also claimed that the Holocaust wasn't that bad. 6 million people didn't die. It was more like 900,000. So I think it was not that bad. That's what he said.
This is a horse that has been beaten senseless and more than dead.
Yeah. Holocaust denial?
It's self-contradictory. It didn't happen, but if it did, it wasn't that bad, and it should happen.
Yep, that's exactly what Tudjman's on about. So Tudjman wrote, genocide is a natural phenomenon in harmony with the sociological and mythological divine nature. He said like God wanted you to commit genocide so you could like prove you were the proven people of God and his like special chosen little soldiers.
Oh, I found a picture of Tudjman kissing the Croatian flag, which I will say not as good as the Albanian flag.
No. The banality of fascism, really. He also was talking about all the stuff right about God and how God wanted you to commit genocide. Got the backing of the Pope. The Pope was like, I agree, Tudjman. So Tudjman came from a long line of fascist Croatians. Remember, the Ustashi in Croatia had collaborated with the Nazis alongside Roman Catholic leadership during World War II.
That all helped them do rat lines later.
Exactly. So this was all part of this. This is why the Pope was like, fuck yeah, Tudjman, we love ethnic cleansing. So from 1991 to 1995, the new army of the Croatian Republic was doing this ethnic cleansing operation on par with its Nazi days. They were executing, displacing, sexually assaulting over 500,000 Serbs from their ancestral homes in Croatia. And they named their new currency of their new breakaway country kuna, which was the currency used by the Ustashi during the Nazi days. Mm-hmm. So books in school were edited to remove all anti-fascist narratives, and libraries were purged of texts that were critical of fascism. And the square of the victims of fascism was just renamed. Streets were renamed to honor fascist leaders in World War II, including this guy, Mile Budak, who signed into law race laws against Serbs, Jews, and Roma people. Tudjman appointed former Nazi collaborators to government posts. And if you listen to our episode on Ukraine, it's very similar to this, right? Mm-hmm. So he also controlled the media tightly and penalized anyone who criticized the government. And the new media labeled all Serbs as terrorists and the Yugoslav People's Army as the Serbo-Communist Occupation Army.
Sick.
So Croatia really went hard.
I feel like it would be so, like, can you be so, the Serbo-Croatian Occupation Army?
Yeah, the Serbo-Communist Occupation Army. It does sound pretty cool. So citizens who were not ethnically Croatian were denied employment and forced to pay higher taxes. You don't get a job, but you got to give us more money from your job you don't get.
So isn't like, this is the like ethnic cleansing and like the Karabash types thing. Yep. Where it's just like, please leave.
Leave, exactly. So 1992, in April, Bosnia-Herzegovina gets recognized also as independent by the United States. This is not done easily, though. Fighting breaks out between the Serbs, Muslims, and Croats, launching what is called the Bosnian War from 1992 to 1995. Muslims, who are 41% of the population, and Croats, who are 17% of the population in Bosnia, want to secede. But the Serbs, like a third of the population, do not. Now, is this maybe you think it is David's birthday? So we could stop here and we could start with part 3. Yeah. Next week will be about the Bosnian War.
I think that's where
that's where we'll start. Okay, that's what we're gonna do. All right. So thank you everybody for hanging around for section 3 of our multi-part series, all on Yugoslavia. It's a wild one. There's so much happening here. And I think generally the big takeaway to me is that communism does a heck of a job at culling ethnic tensions.
Culling is an interesting word to use there.
Oh, I guess you're right. That was in managing, mitigating ethnic tensions.
Militating against.
And then when you remove the communism, the ethnic tensions fly.
Mm-hmm.
They really get intense very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I have quoted more times than I can count on this, like the Richard Wright thing from The Color Line about the Bandung Conference, where he asked the question, is like a third world or like, you know, socialist internationalist project going to win out, or is like a repressive nationalist one?
Right.
And so, I feel like we know the answer now.
Do you really think you're so pessimistic? Well, I think communism will win.
I mean, I like maybe I don't think I'll be alive. But, and, you know, in the moment, it seems like people, like, these are the narratives that people are comfortable with.
Yeah, it is. It is quite sad. But I do believe, you know, we're making progress. The kids prefer communism.
Yeah.
And socialism.
Okay, you're like an internet person.
Yeah.
Right? This is actually this is how I would, this is your birthday present to me.
Okay.
I like every time I encounter the internet communism.
Yes.
It feels like brain rot. Like there is a brain rot aesthetic that people are doing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
What do you mean?
That's like very like hyper pop.
Yes. What about it? And those are the communists?
No, like there is like a style of internet communist that feels very hyper pop to me.
Uh-huh.
Are you?
I've never seen it be hyper pop. No.
Or it's very like meme style.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I guess actually I have seen this in memes, but not in people.
Like no, I mean I like in real life everyone is normal, hopefully.
Right.
But when they get online, their brains break.
Do you think so?
I think this is what happens.
Maybe. Yeah. I also just got recommended an additional book on Yugoslavia. It would have been nice to read before we did the research, but I'll tell everybody. I haven't read it, but I got recommended it, which is NATO in the Balkans, Voices of Opposition, written by Ramsey Clark, Sean Gervasi, Sarah Flounders, Nadja Teshik, Thomas Dykman, and others. Okay. So we got another rec. All right. Well, everybody, that's going to be it for episode 2. As always, sources are going to be in the description of the episode. If you want more of our content, you can check it out on Patreon, patreon.com/pickmeup I'm scared, and we will try to do some sort of bonus episode.
Yeah, let's do something. I feel like the stuff about the sniper tourism bizarrely undersourced, but if you can find anything.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that. All right. And we will be back next week.